Hey everyone, how are you guys doing? How is the Josh? Okay, I'll start with what Sharon was speaking earlier. So, how many of you haven't seen Chickpet? Okay, so if you are buying an apartment in Bangalore, and if you are married, you'll definitely see Chickpet for in your life. Okay, and I was learning car driving that time, and once you park your vehicle in that Maharaja complex or something, there is a parking complex. If you can park your vehicle in that complex, you have learned driving, man. Cool. So into the presentation. So I am a senior software engineer at Intuit. I work on accounting software called QuickBooks. It's a flagship product of Intuit. So in this talk, I want to explain about the different problems faced by front-end people and a solution which I built and open sourced, which can help you big time. So let's go into that. Okay, so I'll start with a basic introduction, what is GraphQL, how GraphQL React applications look like, and typical front-end problems, right? And what is the approach we have taken to solve it, and how you can use it, take advantage of, and decouple the front-end development you have to do. Okay, and any questions we can take later. Quick check, like how many of you work with GraphQL? Cool. Apollo client. This is for all of you. Okay. Anybody worked with, okay, there is no API or the API is very slow or doesn't work sometimes, missing data and all? Have you faced these situations? Okay, cool. Okay, let's start with a small introduction into like how this application flow will be there. So what is GraphQL? Typically in a REST endpoint, basically we call the endpoint and get the data. Like if you are having a user profile endpoint, no matter what information you want, it will give all the information that it is designed for, right? Now in GraphQL, basically you are requesting a graph, part of the graph of the data. So you query what attributes you need, and then in the response, you basically get that data only. And why is this great? Obviously, like the payload size and the interaction is like minimal. And it is like a progressive API. It can go from 0 to 1, right? Like that. So this is typically called as operation name. Okay. So what are the different systems involved in a typical web application? You have UI, the browser the client interacts with, sorry, the user interacts with, and then there is a backend which will fetch the data from the database and give it back to the UI. Now, one level down, in the browser, you basically, okay, we are in React conference, so let's talk in the context of React application, right? So we have components talking to Apollo client, and Apollo client magically gets the data from the backend. How does this wire up look like? So if you look at the code, so you mention what is the endpoint, and you create an Apollo client instance, and you pass it to the React application. On the right side, you have the React component. Basically, it is querying the graph, the data that it needs to render, and it is using that. Okay, so in this whole code, do you see like where exactly the data coming in, how the data is actually getting into the application? We don't, because the Apollo client has such a nice abstraction that it removed all of that. But with that, so what is the problem with that? It is such a nice abstraction, but what is the problem? So you will not have the control on data. So Apollo client is like a magic box. You give it takes the query, it will query the backend and gets the response, and your React application will render that data. So why would you need control on the data? So I worked when the React was not there. It was typical MVC architecture. You have controllers, service layers. And we used to have all these methods which will make the API call, get the data. You can tweak that to return mock response. Okay. But coming to the React world and with GraphQL, you don't have all that flexibility. Why do you need that flexibility? First thing, API not ready. So many times I have seen this happen. Like you are working on a new feature development and the backend is working parallelly to the front end. Probably you will have the schema or contract of the API. And also many times when you are working in with the stage servers, right? It's highly likely that there are constant deployments happening on the stage servers and the API may not respond. And the stage servers are also not like a high-end CPU servers, so you will obviously have high latency on the responses. So how do we avoid all these problems and enjoy the front end? Like decouple yourself from the dependencies, all of them, and truly enjoy the fun coding, right? And also, there are some scenarios where you need to, like, many companies nowadays adapt, like, GraphQL as the backend for front end. What do you mean by that? So you have actual backend, then there is a GraphQL server, and then your UI will be there. So UI will talk to the GraphQL server that will aggregate that information from different endpoints, REST endpoints, and give it back. Now, in these kind of scenarios, what if one server is down? So you will have partial data, like there is some missing chunks of the data. How do you ensure that your application is designed for handling all of this missing data? And how do you, first of all, okay, when you say the application program, the front-end development is done, if you want to demo it, how do you do that? And when you want to raise a pull request, right? Obviously, you cannot have mock data in that and all that stuff. You have to write production code. And how do you ensure that it works? Let's say you mock the data here and there, you put it, and you work with that application, but again, end of the day, you have to remove all that. Now, how can you ensure that the application will work? You have so many floating points, you are adding data here and there are so many floating points. How will you take care of that? The application is still reliable. And this is one very silly thing. Let's say you are working on a delete employee API. Delete employee feature. And I work on QuickBooks. So adding an employee to a company in that software, it will involve you have to add profile information, tax information, work location information, pay types, bunch of setup will be there. Now, if you just want to trigger that API and see if the workflow is working, now you have to go through the very expensive resetup, right? So how can you avoid all this? So this is where, obviously, we mock the data, but how can we do that in a scalable manner? How can you decouple that front-end development? So to do that, we have seen that Apollo client is the one getting the data. Now let's see like what happens inside that Apollo client. So this is like a magical box getting the data. So what happens? What is this Apollo client? How does it look like? So Apollo client is basically a set of links. Think about this as like on the back end you have middleware layers, right? So when a request comes, it will go through some logging, authentication, cookie parsing, and bunch of other stuff, and then the response will come. In the similar manner, think of it like a set of middlewares. So any request from the UI, from the components, they go through all these links. And then there is the last link in the Apollo client is called HTTP link. That is the one which actually makes a call to the backend and returns the response. And then again, the response will go through all the links and come back to the components. So this is like a very high-level overview of what's happening in the Apollo client. Now, how can I solve the problem of mocking the data in a scalable, maintainable manner? So that is the goal. How about replace that HTTP link with a dummy link? Because after all, I want some mock data to come up, right? Mocking the data in the view layer is not good choice because think about the loading experience. Okay, how will you give the loading experience? How will you test it is loading and then it is rendering the data or error? How will you do that? So mocking the data in the view layers is not the correct choice. And also when you undo all the data, it will be unreliable. So the best way to mock the data is near network layer. You go as far as possible from the application near the network layer and return the dummy response. Now there are other frameworks like MSW and other things which can return which can be used as a mock response server. But the problem is there is a lot of overhead. Now to start a server and then you need to understand what is the framework, how is the framework designed, what are the methods, how you need to respond to different status codes, and so many things. There is a lot of overhead. After all, you want just mock the data. But there's a lot of overhead in learning the frameworks. So I was thinking like, okay, I will remove this HTTP link and then place a dummy link. Any request it will come, I will intercept and return mock response. Okay, this is good approach. But the problem is the backend is completely disconnected, right? So definitely mocking has become easy. Like you are doing the mocking completely on the client side. It will be all the mock data is at that single link. So it's near network. So you remove the mock data, then your application is like production code only. 1 point maintenance. This is better, but in order to make now the application, it's not a small thing, right? Like you have bunch of other calls happening. You may be interested only in 1 or 2 calls. Okay, you don't need all the calls to be mocked. And it's a pretty tedious job to mock all the responses also. So this was my initial approach. Now how can we make this scalable? So a better approach is like, okay, instead of removing that HTTP link completely, how about place the dummy link just before the last one? Now with this approach, basically we intercept the response, the queries which we are interested in, and we return the dummy responses for that. And any response, any query that happens which we are not interested in for the rest of the application, let it go through. So now this approach is more scalable. You don't need to mock all of the stuff. Definitely the complete client-side thing. So you are directly interacting within your JavaScript code only on the front end. Like I said, it's 1 point maintenance. You just need to update that link. And you can work with the actual code, actual calls, and the mocking calls. So this is very scalable. How? I will show you. So the API is very, very simple for working with this. It's completely declarative. So you just need to import the library and inject mock. So you provide me what are the links you have in your Apollo client. Because after all, I need to inject that mock link in that set. What are the queries you are interested in? Okay, so that we can mock only that. The rest of them we can be like transparent, let them go through. And what is a mock data configuration? So earlier I mentioned there is an operation name. So in the mock data you can see like for what operation name, what response you want to give. That's it. So this is the simple configuration, and the libraries I will show you in the next slide. That's very small snippet itself. Now with this, most of the problems are solved. Like no API, solved. High latency, solved. Missing data, solved. Any other, even automation testing, you can actually, like how we have, when we run the React code base, right, local server, there is an environment check that happens and it will inject the dev tools and all that stuff, right? So you can actually add those checks and actually use this internally also, so that your entire server itself can be used, automation tests, you can write all of them. Let me show you a small demo of that. Okay, so here This is a simple GraphQL React application. So I am injecting the links, and my target operation is country, which is on the right side of the application, if you see here, using mock data. Okay. So the right side component is using the mock data. The left side component is the actual data. So I can show you here. So the documentation of the library also has the link to the code sandbox. You can personally try it out. So you see here, actually it is using the mock data, but you saw the application, how it is working. It has the loading experience. So if I reload, so they have loading experience. There is no difference between the real and the mock data component. So if I check GraphQL, so there is only get continents, which is the query made by the left side component. Now, I modify the data. So right now I am giving an error response. Okay, now I modify the data to send a proper response. See, that's it. So it is using the data that I am injecting. So I can do n number of combinations, like, because this is completely under your control. Okay, so let me detail you like what is happening internally with the mocking library I built. So every link has this kind of structure. So in order to understand how to build this, I had to go through the Apollo client and understand how the links internally work. Essentially, it is like another kind of Apollo HTTP link only. But what do? We look at the operation. You basically see if that operation is mocked and return the mock data. So that is inside a observable. I gave a default timeout of like 2 seconds so that it will, you see the loading experience. Otherwise, it will forward that operation. That's it. Now, this thought process actually started 6 years back, like when there is Apollo link state. So I solved the problem only for myself, and I gave demo of the product without backend, and it went live behind a feature flag. And after 3 months, the backend was ready. And so you look at the pace you can develop the front end. Like with this library, I could push the UI just 3 months before. Okay, so after 4 years, I came to a similar problem, but I saw people are not using this approach. Then I thought, okay, maybe it's time to build it as a proper open source project and share it across. So then this project I open sourced in February last year. So I hope you guys understand the impact it is creating for you in decoupling that front-end development and take full advantage of it. And if you see any issue with that, please kindly reach out, and happy to see any contributions. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.